the Executive Director for the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, and this webinar is one in a series that we have been doing. We call them coffee break webinars. We've been doing them on Thursdays at 10 o'clock, just about the time that most of us are getting our second cup of coffee. This one will do a little bit longer than our usual half an hour because the topic is so important, relevant, and rich, and Susan has so much to share with us. These webinars are brought to you by your statewide organizations, the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils, the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, and OCEAN, and together we're called the Oregon Conservation Partnership. We have 26 people registered for this, Susan, today, both from watershed councils and SWCD, so I want to welcome everybody. Our presenter with us today is Susan Sanow. She is the Director of the Oregon Natural Resource Education Program at OSU. She's with OSU Extension. And I think you're there in Ballard Hall, if I'm looking at your...
I am.
There on campus, yeah. Susan has been on the ground level of many of the things that you're going to hear about today. She's a key leader in the state of Oregon in environmental education, and there's a lot happening right now and has happened over the last few years. And as many of you know, and I would guess that's why you're on the webinar, beginning this fall, the general education and community events may not be eligible for OWEB funding unless they're deemed necessary for a specific restoration project because of a narrowed interpretation of the word outreach by OWEB. And so the network has heard from at least 18 to 20 of you saying that this is really going to have a big impact on your outdoor education programs going forward. So we wanted to have a chance to have councils and SWCD staff who are involved in outdoor education to hear sort of a general picture of the landscape of outdoor education. And Susan is the best person in Oregon that I know of to share that big picture with us. We are going to have another webinar on August 10th, which is another Thursday at 10 o'clock, after the legislature is finished, we hope, and the outdoor school funding is known. So we'll have a follow-up to this that will really focus specifically on what are the other opportunities for funding and partnering in outdoor education in Oregon in the light of this new interpretation by OWEB. So just a couple of housekeeping things I mentioned briefly at the beginning. Everybody is muted by default, but if you want to ask a question verbally, we'll unmute you if you raise your little icon hand. You can also type a question in the question box, and I'll be watching those. And we are also recording this so that if you want to go back and review any of it or share it with any of your colleagues, you can do that. So I think that's the end of the housekeeping stuff. Susan, I'm just about ready to hand it over to you, but I want to thank you first for agreeing to do this. And I'm really looking forward to getting the big picture on what we've been hearing so much about. So I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I am Susan Sanow, and I'm the director of the Oregon Environmental Education Program. I'm also heading up the early efforts for the outdoor school program, in addition to being the director of the Oregon Natural Resource Education Program. So I've got my fingers in several things right now. I'm going to take you through a series of slides today and talk about these different efforts that are going on around the state. While I'm doing that, I'm going to turn off my camera and just focus on the slides, and then at the end I'll bring the camera back on board again. So if you have questions, again, you can raise your hand or type them in the comments, and Sean's going to be monitoring those. So outdoor education in Oregon. What I want to talk about today are several things. First, just a reminder that, you know, Oregon's natural history or natural environment we've got a long history with that in Oregon. We've been deeply involved both through education and through our day-to-day activities and through our work environments with our natural environment. It is so much a part of who we are in Oregon. So recently, over the last 3 decades, over the next 3 decades, we're expecting Oregon's population to grow significantly. And on top of that, you know, we have all of these mounting pressures around our natural systems, and they're in the news every single day. We're worried about water, climate, agriculture, development. There's just all of these issues. And so the need to connect with our students and people who are really connected with our natural environment and the importance of that to our health and well-being, our social aspects of our life, and to our economic health. It's really important, more than ever, that we are connected and we understand the ways that we intersect with that. And it's sort of a complicated challenge because we have less and less children who are outside and engaged in outdoor activities. They're spending less time than they ever have in history, and yet there's an even greater need for students to be engaged and participating in outdoor activities. So what I want to talk about today are 3 organizations that are 3 statewide organizations that can sort of help coordinate our efforts around re-engaging students and people with the out of doors. So what's interesting, or what I find interesting about this, is these 3 programs that I'm talking about are very much related to engaging students in the out of doors, but they have citizens of all walks of life, both natural resource focused agencies and organizations, as well as business and community members, sort of at the table and part of the conversations about reconnecting people with nature and reconnecting kids with nature. So just a little background to start with. First of all, the Oregon Environmental Education Association has been around since the 60s. And it's a membership organization, puts on a conference once a year, and puts out a newsletter. In the early days, the Environmental Education Association of Oregon was made up primarily of agency, state and federal agency people. So the membership and the people who were putting on the conferences were agencies. And they would they'd put on conferences for teachers. And that's important because the same with outdoor school, early on in the outdoor school in Oregon, state and federal agencies were very involved. They helped put on outdoor schools, they were engaged in outdoor schools, and their agencies supported them in doing that. And they were in the classroom doing activities. So teachers would call and somebody would go in and do something about wildlife. And that was supported by those agencies. And they brought people into the outdoor education and environmental education field and connected with teachers in schools. And they had resources that they brought to the table, and they developed resources. So there was a lot of energy going into environmental education early on by both our state and federal partners. And organizations, nonprofits were also involved, but to a large part, the state and federal agencies were contributing to the health of that system. But what happened in, I think, somewhere around the mid-'80s, things changed. So there was a downturn in funding, and there was a downturn in resources, and a refocus on what the mission of the schools and the state agencies and the federal agencies, what their mission was. So less money, you kind of pull back in and go, what's our core mission, and what can we do with the funding and the staffing capacity that we have. And so there was this transition. So somewhere in the 80s, we lost a lot of that support for teachers to get students outside and the sort of the mentorship and help that they had with that. And even back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, teachers were supported by their schools to go to environmental education conferences and workshops. So early 70s, we used to put on the Effective Learning Conference for teachers. We used to do an environmental education week-long conference where teachers would come for an entire week. Well, that is really rare for that to happen anymore. So recently, with an upswing and a concern for getting kids outside, there's been some renewed focus on our connection and our responsibility as organizations and agencies for the benefits of connecting students to outside. And those benefits are focused around health and well-being, academic success, and academic success, economic health, and then health and well-being. So in about the early, maybe 2005, 2006, there was a lot of attention brought to getting kids outside to learn. And that's about the time that The Last Child in the Woods came out, and a group of people at the national level became very concerned and created a coalition at the national and then at the state levels, got the state level support as well, to introduce federal legislation to focus on environmental literacy. And that effort was to connect funding through the Elementary and Secondary Reauthorization Act. And it said that that funding would only go to states that had an environmental literacy plan in place. So, of course, states got on board, and Oregon was very involved at the very onset, both at the national and the national and the state level. That was led by EEAO, and I'm going to talk about them in just a minute. That's the Environmental Education Association of Oregon. And they started an effort at the state level then to create an environmental literacy plan. So here's what they did. So in September of 2008, they created a coalition. So many of you have probably heard about it. You might have signed on to this coalition. You might have been at some of the meetings. But they created a statewide coalition of people who would support legislation around environmental literacy for K-12 students. They had a couple of legislators who were willing to support that legislation and sponsor that, and in 2009, Governor Kulongoski signed HB 2544 into law. And that law basically formed an advisory committee, or I'm sorry, a task force that came together to write an environmental literacy plan for the state of Oregon for K-12. That task force was made up of representatives of state agencies, natural resource agencies. So I can't name them all right now, but it was the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Oregon Water Resources and the Marine and the Oregon Department of Forestry. And then they had a nonprofit and a member at large. In October, so they spent a year, they had 1 year to write this plan. In 2012, the plan was submitted to the legislature and accepted with, of course, no funding. So the Environmental Education Association really led this effort to have an environmental literacy plan. And then once the plan was written, it didn't really have a home, but they led this effort to find a home for the environmental literacy plan, which came to OSU Extension, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see that this is the website for the Environmental Education Association of Oregon. They're a membership organization. They put on a conference every year. They have great resources. They're doing a lot of work right now around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the environment. And putting on sessions regarding and helping us figure out how to integrate that and use that lens as we do our work. I'm going to give you some, at the very end of this PowerPoint, I will give you some things you can do when you get off of the webinar today, which will include EEAO. So the Environmental Literacy Plan was created, and it's an individual's understanding, skills, and motivation to make responsible decisions and consider his or her relationship to natural systems, communities, and future generations. And it really focused on 5 strands of environmental literacy, and that is systems thinking. And that's really the tools and techniques we use around systems thinking. Physical living and human systems, interconnectedness of people and the environment, personal and civic responsibility, and then the ability to investigate, plan, and create a sustainable future. If you think about the work that you do as watershed councils, you do all of this. And when you actually go to the plan, this is just the headers off of those strands. It really digs down or drills down deeper into each of those and what that looks like. And the other thing to know about the plan is that it was written for what do students at the 12th grade level need to know and be able to do. The goal of the plan was to ensure that Oregon students become lifelong stewards of their environment and their community, are willing and able to exercise the rights and responsibilities of environmental citizenship, that they would choose to interact frequently with the outdoor environment, that they would become lifelong stewards, that they were willing and able to, oops, did that go forward? Oops, I don't know.
Looks fine. Looks fine. Yeah, it's fine.
Sorry. Okay. So that environmental literacy plan was written at the 12th grade level. In 2013, that plan, they put out an RFQ, a request for qualifications for somebody to lead the effort in implementing this plan. And OSU Extension responded to that RFQ and was awarded that program. Well, it came to OSU without any funding. So we have been working to create a system for implementing the plan with little funding. So we have a program coordinator, that's me, I'm doing that as a part of my FTE. We've been able to put together a little bit of funding to hire a project coordinator through some funding through the Pisces Foundation, the Gray Family Foundation, and a couple of other grants that we've gotten. We put together an OSU leadership team, which is 10 people who have OSU Extension FTE, and they're dedicating a portion of that FTE to work on this program. And then we also solicited members. We have 12, we probably have about 12 right now, members that represent regional, programmatic, and cultural diversity from around the state. And they really set the strategic path for environmental literacy and how that's implemented. So every year we get together, we look at what are the next projects we should be taking on in order to advance environmental literacy. And then we have regional leader teams. So those are 2 to 8 members of mostly non-formal educators that are located around the state, and they call meetings periodically with their partners. They bring their partners together both to share with us what they're doing in terms of outdoor and environmental education, and also to look at what are the resources and tools and skills that are needed out there on the ground that we can help develop. And this is the website. I see that this got cut off, so we'll fix that and we'll get you the right one. So the projects that the environmental literacy program have taken on, they're looking at common measures for outdoor schools. So one of the things we're interested in is what does outdoor education look like in every grade level? And for 5th, 6th grade, that's outdoor school. So we have a group that's looking at, if we have outdoor school at 5th and 6th grade, what are some measurements we can use regardless of what kind of outdoor school you have. Now this project started before the outdoor school program looked like it was going to happen, and so we'll be combining that with the new outdoor school program. We're also looking at outdoor school professional development for teachers. And what does that look like? If we don't want outdoor school to be a drop-in program, what is it? What can we do to help teachers teach before and after? And then we're also creating an K-12 outdoor education framework. So besides 4th and 5th grade, what does outdoor education look like in K1, 2, and 3, 4, and then beyond 5, 6, so that we have this continuum of outdoor education experiences. And with that one, what we're really focusing on is what are the tools, techniques, resources, and strategies that we can give teachers to take their kids outside for the first time. We're really trying to focus on those teachers that don't take their kids out very often. So it's not as easy as just stepping out the door. As you all know, teachers worry about, how do we fit it into standards? Why would I want to do this? What am I going to do about classroom management? What do I do with them once I get them out there? How do we set it up so it's safe? So we're trying to help teachers think about how to step into that. The other project that we finished just recently is, and it'll be on our website, it is on our website, is what does environmental literacy look like at every grade level? And if the plan defines it at 12th grade, what does it look like at 1st and 2nd grade, for example? And what are the standards that support taking kids outside, or that support environmental literacy at that grade level? So I'm going to move on, just in order to keep us on time here, to outdoor school. So the environmental literacy plan, we took it on at Extension in 2013. We started focusing on all of those projects and tools around environmental literacy and outdoor education. And then in 2014, an organization formed called the Oregon Outdoor Education Coalition. And they formed specifically to look at how do we support outdoor school throughout Oregon. So like I mentioned earlier, 1970s, 80% of Oregon schools were participating in outdoor school. Today, outdoor schools and outdoor education as part of the school curriculum has diminished significantly. And that's due to funding. It's also due to standards and the sort of the policies and practices that are required within the school system. So in 2014, a passionate group of community leaders came together. And it really started with Friends of Outdoor School, who was supporting Multnomah Outdoor School program. Multnomah Outdoor School has been in existence since the 60s. Friends of Outdoor School formed to help support and find funding to send those kids to outdoor school, and they were revisiting their funding strategy and saying, what's the next source of funding that we need to support Multnomah Outdoor School program, when they kind of looked at each other and said, why would we do this just for Portland? We should be doing this for the entire state. They formed this coalition, and that coalition spent a year working with communities around the state and legislators and collecting stories and going to meetings to gain support for legislation for outdoor school. Their job was really to secure and expand outdoor education so that every student in Oregon had that. And originally they were looking at what would it cost to get every student at every grade level to an outdoor education experience. And in doing that, realized that the best place to start was outdoor school, because we have this history with outdoor school and most Oregonians are connected to outdoor school. So they really focused on these three aspects of outdoor education and getting kids to outdoor school, and that's academic achievement and engagement, health and well-being, the physical, social, and emotional part of that, and career and workforce readiness. They introduced a bill, and that bill passed in 2015, and it named Oregon State University Extension Service as the program that would administer the program and that would administer the outdoor school program. And that we would do that by administering grant programs to school districts and ESDs. But they did not fund it. So this passed, I think all but one person voted for this in 2015. So no funding, but the coalition wasn't willing to let it go. They went back to their supporters around the state and said, looked at different ways to raise money for outdoor school, and decided that going after the lottery funds, the economic development portion of the lottery funds, was the way to pursue this. And they solicited, or they did a survey, a research survey, to look at what the economic impact would be of outdoor school in Oregon. So they looked at sort of what it means for communities that are hosting camps, the kinds of jobs that it creates in terms of the outdoor schools that are running, but also in terms of the students who go to outdoor school. And it made sense to go after that portion of lottery funds. $22 million is what they said it would cost to send every 5th or 6th grader in the state of Oregon to go to outdoor school, and that passed on November 8th. And it passed in all but 2 counties of Oregon, and even those 2 counties were not very far off from passing it. So right now, the measure, after that, the measure goes through a legislative process, and they have to look at what our budgets, our state budget, can support. And as you know, we're in a pretty big deficit. We should know fairly soon what that funding is going to look like. We don't expect that it's going to be $22 million a year in this first round of funding. I think it's going to be closer to 20 to 24. So I think 24 has just been proposed, the Ways and Means, and then they're going to have to figure out what we actually get. So here's what we know. Once we get the funding, we'll have to look at what we have for funding and figure out what amount of money people can apply for. So the funding will be for all 5th or 6th graders in the state of Oregon. The dollars can only go to school districts or ESDs. So they apply for the funding to OSU Extension, and it's an application process, and I can talk about that in a minute. And then they can be reimbursed for their outdoor school program based on the amount of money that we get from the legislature. It's not mandatory. It's an opt-in program. We expect the program to be a flexible program and not prescriptive. And what I mean by that is we're not going to say this is the curriculum that you have to use in every single outdoor school program. We have an advisory committee that has K-12 representation as well as representation from outdoor school providers and teachers and camps. So we've tried to get a wide diversity of representation on that advisory committee. We also have 6 work groups, each focused on a different aspect of doing the outdoor school work. So right now we believe the way the process we're working on for the funding is that school districts or ESDs will complete what am I trying to say? An agreement, a master agreement that says we agree to do these things as part of the outdoor school program. And that agreement is in place at the district or the ESD. And then that can be, agreement would be in place for maybe 5 years. And then what they would do is apply for the funds and then invoice us for the funds once they've expended the funds. So we're trying to create a simple process as much as possible, but there will be some reporting requirements. There's also funding that comes to OSU Extension to set up this program and to put together the staff that can help coordinate the resources, provide assistance out to school districts and ESDs, and to partners, and provide professional development. We don't know when the funding is going to be available, although we're getting closer to knowing that. We don't know the amount that'll be available and whether that'll be a per person or a per school amount. What we're looking at is an application that's based on a per student by using that ADM formula that school districts use in terms of trying to get to the equity part of this funding. We're working on what the details of what the expenses will cover. It's to cover buses and camp costs and food costs. We know that, but then does it cover administrative costs at the school district level? We don't know that. We know that we'll have a framework for curriculum that'll be based on 5th and 6th grade standards and conceptual learning at those grade levels, ecological concepts, and that will create a framework but allow for flexibility across the state. We know that we won't have all 5th and 6th graders as we roll this out. It's going to be a process over time, but we are expecting once we get funding that we will be able to send some kids to outdoor school this fall. And we're working on exactly what those reporting requirements, but will be, some of that is spelled out in the law if you haven't read it. It's a really easy piece to read, and those reporting requirements also will change over time. They'll probably be pretty simplistic the first 2 years, but enough reporting that when we go to the legislature in the next biennium, we'll have some data. So here's how you can get involved. Join EEAO. It's the membership organization in the state. They have a newsletter that comes out, great information. If you're doing programming, it's a great place to put your information. And they put on conferences every year, and it's also a place for you to present what you're doing out there. Become a member of the Oregon Environmental Literacy Regional Leader Team in your area, and if you don't have one in your area, start one. When you go to our website, there's a place where you can see there's a map of our regional leader teams. If you don't have one, start one. So the regional leader teams are just 2 or 3 or more people who want to make sure that partners are coming together periodically to coordinate their efforts around environmental literacy and environmental education. We have a resource database on our website where you can go in and you can put your organization, your programs that you do, the standards that you meet, the grade level, and then your website, so it directs teachers to that. It's a searchable database for teachers. You can host a meeting of partners and invite the OELP project coordinator to attend your meeting. And you can follow the Outdoor School website. That's Outdoor School information is on the OELP website. During the time that we're setting this up, school districts, ESDs, and camps are going to need help as they're preparing for this. And you can be a resource for them as you provide information and resources and expertise. So with that, questions and comments. You can contact me at this site. My email, my phone number, and the OELP website. Wow, barely made that. We got a few minutes for questions. I'm going to go back on camera.
Hands, yeah. Looking for hands or any comments, questions? Yeah, Susan, let me just ask a question, and then maybe it'll give some time for folks to think about it. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. To your knowledge, just totally offhand, and I apologize if this puts you on the spot, but I'm just curious if you know any outdoor schools right now that are already engaged with, or regional teams that already have watershed councils or SWCD folks involved in them? Do you know offhand?
You know, I don't know specifically. My understanding is that Albany has watershed council. Would that be Calapooya?
Yes, it
And
would.
maybe they're on the webinar. They might. Is that where Melissa's at?
Melissa's on the coast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think maybe the Calapooya. So here's what I think watershed councils, one of the pieces they could really help with is as we develop this framework and we start developing, we'll be looking for curriculum that fits that framework, and we're going to be looking at best practices and trying to provide some resources on the website where folks can go to download information. But it's going to take us a while to get there, and we're going to need some folks that can help with field site or field study sites, you know, and that might be actually being field site instructors, or it might be helping an outdoor school program or a camp look at the right curriculum for their site and their area.
Great. I just realized, I apologize, Karen, you've had your hand up for a while, and for some reason I couldn't see it. You are now unmuted. If it's not too late to ask your question or make a comment, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My question is, I work for an SWCD, and
Okay.
My question is more along the lines of what Sean was alluding to, but something to keep in mind that's important for SWCDs and watershed councils is that we're always looking for funding sources to help us. So, yeah. So is that coming, or will that be developed as part of what you're doing?
Well, so I guess I'm not sure what the answer is really. So the funding is very specific in the law. The funding goes to ESDs and school districts. However, so if you look at, say, Multnomah County ESD, they put on the outdoor school program for Multnomah County schools, right? So the question is, if we had an ESD, say, in Klamath Falls, I'm just pulling that out of the air, there's nothing there, but say it's Klamath Falls and they don't have outdoor school and they want an outdoor school, but they didn't start, could they contract with a watershed council to actually put on the outdoor school? It's a question.
Okay, so do we need to help them understand how to do that then?
Right, so maybe part of their application, maybe you are the outdoor school program that's providing it, so you do all of it. You build the curriculum, you reserve the camps, and you figure out the high school, you just figure out the whole program, and they contract with you to do it.
So it'd be like pass-through funding through them?
Yeah,
to the...
yeah. Okay. They're actually contracting with you, or maybe they pay the camp separately, so the camp, they contract with the camp, but they're contracting with you to do the curriculum. We're still trying to figure a lot of this out, but we do know that our school districts and ESDs are going to need some help. They, you know, for folks who haven't been doing it, and Klamath Falls is, so I probably shouldn't have used that example, but there are just a lot of areas where they're not doing outdoor school, or they're doing day programs, or they're doing programs that don't really fit what we would consider an outdoor school program, but maybe we need to get them there, and they need the resources, and they need some consulting help. But where the funds come in, that's we're still trying to figure that out.
Okay.
So I can add to that a little bit. You know, the purpose of today was to give you the broad overview of what's going on, and basically the key message is it behooves SWCDs and watershed councils to really understand this broad landscape and who the players are, and to be involved at the strategic level, not just in delivery, but in helping set the stage for what's going to happen next, because as Susan has said, it's really evolving as we speak. And so making sure that you really stay out front and not just in a mode of trying to keep your own programs going, but think strategically about how you can be a key player in what is available. And right now, the show, funding-wise, we believe is going to be an outdoor school. So how can you help? What are your assets that you bring to a school district or an ESD that may help fill in some gaps that they have? So I think it's a sort of a different way of thinking, not just looking for funding to keep your own programs going, but how are you going to modify your programs so that they are, or at least spending early time at the front end with
Selling
strategic players. Yeah.
Can I add to that? So, the reason I focused on these three organizations is, number one, EEAO is a membership organization, and it's one of the ways to the state level and figure out what's going on at the state and national level, because they're very involved with the North American Association of Environmental Educators. They're doing some amazing work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and more of our granting agencies are asking us how we're addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in our programming. So you need to be at the table on that. In terms of the environmental literacy, all of these three programs are about this statewide effort to start connecting what we do so we're all on the same path, right? So we've been doing all these programs around Oregon for a long time, and they're great, but how do we qualify and quantify what we're doing and really be able to tell the story of the impact that we're having, because that's what it's about. And the impact is what's going to bring the funding.
Right, okay.
So I've just unmuted you, Dana. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Can you give me your names when you talk?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, it's not showing that on my screen. So I'm Dana, I'm from the Longtom Watershed Council. I was curious, and maybe you already said it, is there an efficient way to find out kind of what the outdoor school landscape is in our region? Just kind of which ESDs, which districts are doing what?
My gosh. Thank you for asking that. I totally forgot to say anything.
Okay, yay, I thought I missed it.
This is what you can help us with right now. So we are trying to get contact. We're trying to get that information. So the Gray Family Foundation has a contractor right now that's calling school districts and ESDs and trying to figure out, sort of get baseline information around that. So that information will be on the website as they get it. So we'll point to the Gray Family Foundation site as that report comes out. The other thing is, if you have relationships with schools or ESDs, we need their summer contact, because once funding comes and we have an application process, we need to be able to get that out to folks. But as you know, they're not in school, and if they haven't given us that information, they're not going to get information about the agreements and the application for this fall. So we're working really hard at trying to get that contact information, and if you can help us with that, that would be amazing. So then I would say we have a stakeholder listserv. So if you go to the OELP website and the outdoor school website, there's a place there for questions and comments. If you go in there and just give us your name and address, we put you on a stakeholder listserv. We're sending out regular communication. So that's probably the best place to keep abreast of what's happening generally, but not necessarily in your area. I think as we move forward and we have our committees working and functioning well, we'll have a little more information about local efforts.
And Susan, quick question, follow-up. Who are the people at the ESD level that would be, is it the curriculum people, or who are the big players at the ESD level?
I would start with either the administrator of the ESD or the curriculum person. It's sort of, I've been watching the contacts that are coming in because people are sending us their contact information for summer, and it's all over the board. Some of the school districts, it's a teacher, sometimes it's an administrator, sometimes it's the office specialist. Yeah, it's all over the board.
So you don't know where to start, but the point is to start making those contacts.
The point would
right?
be to start with the school. I'd start with the school school office administrator and just say who in your area would be or in your ESD would be the most likely person to be interested and has been tracking this. They know people.
Great.
And they often are the gatekeepers. But if you know them personally, or if you know somebody personally, I would just start there.
Susan, those are excellent hints. Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions, and we'll just wait a second, pause in case there's anybody else that wants to throw their hand up, and see if I've missed any more questions. I don't see any.
There's
Okay.
one link in the PowerPoint that's not, that needs to be fixed, Sean, so you and I should talk about that before you
Okay,
post.
so what you and I can do, Susan, is we can get the updated PowerPoint out to everybody who registered for the conference, and then
So that'll have all the websites and contact information on it.
Great. All right. Well, this is the beginning of a much longer conversation. I've been kind of puzzled by the timeline of all these things that have happened. I was involved in EEAO back in the 80s, and I know the story then, but I hadn't really been able to piece it together. So Susan's explanation has just been invaluable. So once again, thank you everybody for being on this. This is being recorded, and we'll make it available on the network's website probably by tomorrow afternoon. It takes a little while to download it. And we're doing a send-off today for Jerry Nicolescu because he's retiring this afternoon, so I won't have a chance to get it up then. But so I don't see any other questions, comments. Thank you, everybody. And Susan, once again, thank you to you. We'll stop the recording, and we'll end here. And by all means, let us know if there's any questions or follow-up. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.